Standing just 6'1", Nate "Tiny" Archibald was a dominant scorer and playmaker in the 1970s. He remains the only player in history to lead the league in both scoring and assists. In 1981, he was the floor general for the NBA champion Boston Celtics.
He had one of the most dominant seasons that I've ever seen in the NBA. The year that he led the league in scoring, averaging about 34 points a game, led the league in assists the same year. And I think the first 2 or 3 years, Tiny was just finding himself because he was on the Cincinnati team. He wasn't the dominant player on that team. I would say when they moved to Omaha, he became the man. And here is a guy that you really hated to try to guard because he'd come at you a mile a minute. He was quick, he was fast, he was left-handed, he was a dominant scorer and a guy that brought fear to a lot of us in the NBA because he was that good.
Tiny was always a great basketball player, left-handed, but the thing that made Tiny great is that he was ambidextrous in scoring and going to the basket and scoring. Very few left-handers would score as much as Tiny did going to the basket.
A lot of heart, a lot of gut, a lot of grit. Because, you know, to come in there with all of the big trees, and back then you had a lot of centers in the game that were just planted down there. And he would come in there and attack you, and you would say, I'm gonna knock this guy on his butt. You would knock him on his butt, he'd come right back at you again.
He scored a tremendous amount early on. But then, of course, when later in his career, he went to Boston, and his game changed. He was more of a distributor, playing alongside Bird and McHale and those players. You know, one of the great things I think you can say about a player is when you're playing for a team, and you go to a team, you try to figure out, how can I contribute? How do I fit in? You may be a scorer on one team, but another team, you now become a little bit of a distributor from the guard position. And I think he did that very well. And that's just a sign, in my opinion, of how good he was.
Early in my career, I was with him. I get a rebound, throw it out, just start running the floor as fast as I can. Tiny never looks behind him as I'm catching up and bobbing and weaving. Tiny goes up and drops the ball off to me, and I'm telling you, I always watch guys' eyes and the head, but I'm running up, assuming if he misses, I'm gonna try to put a putback. I have no idea he sees me. I have no idea how he saw me. He dropped the ball to me, and I remember thinking, oh my goodness, like this guy literally has eyes in the back of his head.
So 34 points per game for Tiny, the most ever by a point guard in league history, which is still amazing because that's held intact to this day, GA. But you were telling me about coming back from the Achilles injury. He's in a class of his own there as well.
Yeah, and that season you talk about, he also led the league in assists, averaged over 11 assists a game. And, you know, statistically, he did about as much as any guard has ever done. What was ironic about it, though, was the question was, could he win? Because he did it statistically, but playing for some Kansas City Kings teams, they never really were good enough to get over the hump. And so that question always lingered. But, you know, Tiny Archibald, or Nathaniel, I like to call him Nathaniel, I was mesmerized by him because he was a southpaw. As a lefty, being a left-handed player, you know, I didn't get to see a lot of guys. I didn't get to see Lenny Wilkins growing up as a kid. So for me to be able to watch him and watch how he orchestrated a team, how he could control the entire tempo of the game as a southpaw and as a smallish guard, it was amazing. And you mentioned the Achilles. Then not only back then, people didn't come back from a torn Achilles. So not only does he come back, he makes 3 All-Star games, gets traded to Boston, and then is able to go on and win a World Championship as well. And that kind of validated him in the eyes of those who maybe questioned him because he hadn't won yet. But he is an all-time great, just an incredible talent. And his game would translate to today's game because of how crafty he was and how well he could shoot the basketball.
Yeah, that's a great point that you made, how his game would fit into today's game. Still, the first and only player to lead the NBA in points and assists in the same season. Graduate of DeWitt Clinton High School in New York, a New York City legend.
I never saw Tiny play. My assistant at the time, a young man named Draft Young, was given instructions by me in the fall of that year to find a penetrating point guard. Shooting skills were not that important, but I needed someone to be able to set up and run the show, basically. And he came back to me in December of that year as the college season began and said, hey, I've got someone that will fit the bill completely, that no one will know about because he's not a scorer and he plays for a very conservative coach at Texas El Paso, so he won't get a lot of attention. And he's our man, and lo and behold, we didn't even have to draft Tiny #1. We got him as a #2 pick, and he may very well be the best #2 pick in the history of the NBA.